So today we'll discuss about Azure SQL Server. So what is meant by SQL Server, why we need to use it, and what are the types of SQL servers we have. So this is not like a typical out and out related to the SQL, but my primary focus is to introduce you what is the SQL Server in Azure, how we can create SQL Server in Azure, and how we can connect it, how we can utilize it. So that is my primary agenda. So now, if you see the SQL Server, anything, this we used to call it as a data platform or a database server. Database server. So what is meant by database server? Why we need this? Okay. So for example, any organization, if you consider any organization, so every organization have certain data. So every organizations will run only based on data. Okay. Data can be in any format. Like if you consider data is in two ways. One is static data and second one is dynamic data. Okay, there are two type of data we have. So what is meant by static data? Static data is nothing but is a fixed data. Like if you consider the images, or like I can say files, or I can say the videos. So okay, anything, or PDFs. So anything which is fixed, that we used to call it as static data. Static means it remains fixed, whereas dynamic means it will vary. So in data scenario, dynamic is nothing but a text format. So anything, any text or any description or anything, that we used to call it as a dynamic data, which can generate on the flow, okay, on the fly. That is dynamic data. Or it could be ASPX or .aspx pages or HTML, anything you can consider. So which contains data and which will varies regularly. So any data it could be, you can take images or files or anything. If you observe, to store that images and files, you need a place. For example, to store that data, we have multiple ways. One is file system you have, and you have database you have. So one is file system and second one is database. In two places you can store your data. For example, if I consider file system, what is meant by file system? The file system is nothing but it's a fixed place. Like, it's a D drive you can consider, or F drive you can consider, whatever the drive you have on your laptop, or it could be external drive, or it could be an FTP, or any place where you can store your data. For example, I have certain images like 1.jpeg, and second one is 2.jpeg, and test.jpeg, for example. So I have three images at the moment, and I want to store those images. So first option we can consider as a file system. So if you go and store your images in a file system, like in your laptop, like D drive or E drive or somewhere, I can store it here. Okay, so if I store it here, is there any possibility that, let me create that stuff as well. For example, I can consider as one image and two image. For example, I stored these two images in my drive. So okay, you stored it, it's absolutely fine. Now if you want to retrieve, or if you want to perform any query, like I want to know what are the images with a format of BMP, or I want to know what are the files which are created one day ago, okay, from last 24 hours, or I want to know the files which are having with name X, or I want to know what are the files having size less than 20 KB, or less than 20 MB, or greater than 1 GB. So there are certain kind of queries. If you want to perform that queries, you cannot perform on your normal file system. Okay, so it will be a bit difficult to perform, so you cannot perform that file. And if you observe this way, Here you are not putting your content in a structured manner. So you are putting your BMP here itself, you are putting your partial script here itself, you are putting your text file here itself. Okay, so everything you are keeping, or some Excel sheet you are putting here itself. So anything you are putting in a unstructured manner. You are not putting in a, like, I want to put all the BMP files in one place, or I want to put all the Excel in one place, or I want to put only this one in one place. Although you can create folders, but typically those are also comes in a unstructured manner only. Okay, and it would be a bit difficult. So for example, I have this folder, I want to search only on the images, I want to search only images. But if you observe this folder, this contains images, this contain Excel sheet, this contain PowerShells, so many things are there. So it would be a bit difficult to track everything because you're not putting in a structured manner. Okay, so that is the basic disadvantage of a file system, because if you want to put some data, you don't know where to put. Just you have only one place to put all data, you need to put in that place only. Okay, it would be a bit difficult to retrieve the data. Okay, so that is the problem. So to overcome this situation, there is a concept of database. So what is meant by this database? So in this database, the data can be stored in a structured manner. Okay, the data can be stored in a structured manner. How? The data will be stored in tables. Okay, so everything will be stored in the tables. Basically what table have? Tables have row headers or a column headers you have. Okay, this is the serial number, or this is the name, and this is the size, and this is the date created. So all this stuff it used to maintain. Okay, so in this table it will maintain all this stuff, like serial number it will maintain, and date it will the name it will maintain, size, date modified. So everything they used to put in a table. So whatever the data you want to putting into this table, it will add in that specific row. Okay, so row number, and then what is the name of the file, and what is the data you are keeping, and what is the size it has having, and when it is modified. So everything it is maintained in a structured way. Okay, so that it would be easy to identify what is happened at what time. Okay, it will be easy to put the data, as well as it will be easy to retrieve the data. Okay, so this is the basic advantage of database over file system. And the database also offering a mechanism to query the table. It is also offering a mechanism to query the table. So for example, I have this table. In this table, I want to see the serial numbers from 13 to 15, or the names starting with X, or the files greater than 20 MB, or the files less than 20 MB, or the files created last 24 hours, in last 24 hours, or the files created in last 3 months. Okay, so those kind of queries you can execute in a query plane, or it's a terminal. This query mechanism offering by database. Okay, we don't have that possibility in file system. Okay, so basically the database functionality offered by many vendors. So few of the vendors are like MySQL or MS SQL, Microsoft SQL, and you have NoSQL, and you have PostgreSQL, Postgres PGSQL we used to call it as PostgreSQL. So many databases you have, like you can use Oracle, you can use many data, Mongo or Cosmos DB or Redis DB. So there are many databases available in the market. The primary functionality of the database is to store the data in a structured way, and it will allow us to query the data, and it will be easy to put the data, as well as it will be easy to get the data as well, or retrieve the data as well. And if you observe the query itself, see, whatever you have, whatever your requirement, for example, I want to see the files greater than 20 MB. So if you see your statement, this you can understand, but the database won't understand. Okay, to make that understandable to the machine or to the database, you need to write your requirement in the machine understandable way. Okay, so that is called the query language. That is called as query language. So every database whatever we discussed, each database have its own query language. Okay, you need to use that query language to put the data as well as to get the data. Okay, for MS SQL there is a separate query language. If you want to go for, and if you want to utilize Microsoft SQL, you need to learn that SQL commands. If you want to go for NoSQL, you have to learn that commands. Or if you want to go for RKDB, you need to learn that commands. You want to go for Cosmos, you have to learn that commands. Or Redis, you need to learn that commands. Or Mongo, you need to learn that commands. Every database had its own understandable language. If you want to query the database, you need to write that queries in that understandable way. So that is the reason every database has its own query language. Okay, at the moment we are talking about SQL. Here it has structured query language. We used to call it as SQL means structured query language. So if you want to learn SQL, you need to learn that SQL queries to perform any actions on the databases. Now, what is the difference between server and what is the difference between database? Why you need both? Okay, if you observe the basic structure, this we used to consider as a server, this we used to consider as a server, and inside the server you have databases. So you need to create databases like this. So okay, so if you want to create a database, what is the prerequisite? The prerequisite is, first I need to create an SQL server, and inside that SQL server only I will create the databases. Okay, this is the primary requirement. Now we'll see how we can create an SQL server and how we can create a database inside SQL server. Okay, before I'm explaining this particular thing in Azure, I will explain the typical Azure typical SQL server in on-premise as well as Azure. So the basic structure, if I explain, this is the same way like SQL server it must have and database it must have. Okay, if it is on-premise, what you need to do, you must have one server created, you must have one virtual machine, or you must have one server created, and on top of it you need to create install one operating system on the server, and there you need to install this all much stuff. Okay, so all this stuff you need to create or you need to install on the server itself. Okay, so this is the basic thing you need to do in a normal server or a normal on-premises environment or in Azure also. Okay, so if you need an SQL server, what you need to do, you must have one virtual machine created. Okay, this is the old scenario I'm talking about. You must have one VM. Inside that VM you have an operating system, and within that VM you have to install your SQL server, and inside that you need to create one databases and all this stuff. This comes under infrastructure as a service component, where you need your VM. Inside the VM you are creating your SQL stuff. Okay, now Azure is offering a functionality of PaaS, platform as a service. Means you don't need to worry about the virtual machine. Everything will be taken care by Azure side. You directly come and create a SQL server directly. Inside that SQL server you can create databases directly. You don't need to worry about the virtual machines. Okay, so if you need infrastructure as a service component, yes, they are offering that also. This we used to call it as Azure SQL instance. Okay, instance is nothing but a server or a VM. So this is called Azure SQL instance, where they are offering a virtual machine. Inside that virtual machine they are offering a SQL server. I don't want to maintain this virtual machine. I don't want to worry about my operating system and all this stuff. Instead I will go for a platform as a service. I can directly create my SQL server and I can directly create my databases inside it. There is no need to worry about your infrastructure part. That we used to call it as platform as a service. So both functionalities Azure is offering. Okay, so now we'll see how the both components will be and how basically we'll create an SQL server and the databases. Okay, so before creating that, so we'll talk about the configurations. So for every server or for every device, so it must have certain configuration if you talk about. Okay, for normal virtual machine, the configuration we'll talk about under virtual CPUs and memory, RAM we can consider as. memory or RAM we can consider as. Okay, for normal virtual machine, yes, you can consider your virtual CPUs and memory. Based on that, you will get a virtual machine. That's absolutely fine. But what if I want to create a pass-based SQL server? So what configuration I need to choose? How I can choose it? So for this, there is a concept called DTU, or data throughput units. Okay, so based on this, okay, you need to create, or you need to select the respective configuration for your Azure SQL Server. So based on the DTUs, it is offering both functionality. If you want, you can choose DTU based model, or if you want, you can choose the traditional based model. It's up to you. You can use CPU based model as well as you can use DTU based models also. So the DTU means, for example, if it is a 50 DTUs, so it will calculate the backend virtual CPU and backend memory related to that. You don't need to worry about it. So you need to select your your SQL based on DTUs as well as CPUs. It's up to you. So this is the basic configuration of the SQL server on both. Now if you want to create an SQL server, what you need to do, just go to your Azure portal and search for SQL server. Okay, SQL server you need to select. If you want to create an SQL managed instance, that you can create it. That is what I told you. It will create a virtual machine. Inside that it will offer you SQL. I want to create an SQL server directly. Yes, you can create an SQL server directly. Come to SQL server and then click on create. Okay, and it will offer you all the steps. You just need to select your subscription and the respective resource group to create and the server name to create. So whatever the server name you want to put, just put that server name. Okay, and this server name must be unique. Just keep it in mind. So you just provide a unique name. In your organization there is certain syntax people used to follow. Just follow that syntax and select the respective location where you want to keep, and about logging. So this part. So how you want to connect to your SQL database service using Entra only authentication, means whatever the login you have used to connect to this portal.azure.com, if you want to use the same, you can use that. Or else you can create one SQL username and password that you can utilize. That we used to call it as SQL authentication. If you want to create an SQL authentication, it will ask you to create a username and password. Okay, or I want to use for Microsoft, by default it will use your own mail ID. Okay, if you want to use for both, yes, you can use both. It's up to you. But preferable method is people use SQL authentication. Some organizations they will use Entra, some organizations they will use both. It depends on the organization to organization. So as we discussed, we have two type of access. One is Entra and second one is SQL. If you want, you can use both. So let's say we'll try with both for SQL as well as Entra. If you want, we can use both SQL as well as Entra authentication, or else you can use only SQL or only Entra. It's up to you. And as I use both, then it is asking to set Entra ID as an admin. So I will select myself as admin, and server admin login. You can use SQL admin, and then password you can give whatever you want, and yeah, and click on networking part. So if you want, you can implement this particular SQL server within your firewall if you have any existing, or else you can keep it as no. So what it will do, if there is a firewall configured and without need of exclusive specifications like which number, which IP I need to allow, or which specific service I need to allow, instead if you keep it as S, the Azure services automatically will try to access the server. But basically you can keep it as and anyway we'll create private endpoint stuff to connect to the SQL database or SQL server from the respective services. And click on security part. So if you want to enable system assigned managed identity, then you can enable the identity, and then this is by default. If you want, you can use service managed key, or if you want, you can use a service managed key, or if you want, you can use customer managed key. It's up to you. By default you can keep it as it is, don't need to change it. And if you want to enable Microsoft Defender for SQL, so that it will try to identify is there any user who is having improper access, or is there anything vulnerable. So those kind of stuff it will try to identify, and it will tell you. That is about Microsoft Defender for SQL. If you want, you can enable it, or if you want, you can disable it. But by default in real-time environments, you must enable it. Okay, you must enable it so that it will try to identify any vulnerabilities or anything inside the SQL, and it will let you know. And click on next, and here if you want you can specify any tags for identification purpose, like created by, or like the purpose or the environment or anything, whatever you want to specify, that you can specify as per your organization standards. And just click on review, and then it will take a while to go for validation, and then click on create, so that it will start creating SQL server. So deployment is successful. So now when you go to the resources created, so this is the SQL server, it got created. So by default options you can see it all the way. And if you see the overview here, if you want you can create a new database inside SQL server or elastic pool. A pool is nothing but combination of servers or combination of things, that we used to call it as a pool. And then import database, if you want to, I don't want to create a new one, I have existing one, I want to import it, yes, you can import it. And if you want to reset password for the main SQL admin user, that you can reset from here itself. Or if you want to move the resource from here to another resource group or another subscription, then you can do these options. But don't move to another resource group or don't move to another subscription, there might be many complications. Okay, so that's all about essentials. And if you see the activity log, again it will tell you whoever made any changes on the SQL server side in the portal, that you can see it. And if you want to provide anyone access to the SQL server to manage an Azure portal, okay, to manage it on Azure portal inside SQL database, that access provisioning is different. But on the portal, if you want to manage anything, that you can provide it under SQL's this access control part. Here you can add the respective user or service principal or identity to provide access to this SQL server. And then tags part, that is for identification purpose. If you want, you can create any number of tags here, whatever you want. And next, by default, the SQL server is offering an option called Kickstart. Here it will show you certain things like, if you want to access your SQL server, how you are going to access, by using SQL Server Management Studio, or by using some external tool called SDK, or software development kit, or Microsoft Azure PowerShell. So which option you want to access your SQL server. But in real time, nobody will access by using the portal itself, because it's an internet connection. So from internet, your SQL server won't allow connections. So that is the reason we have to download one SQL Server Management Studio in your place, like virtual machine or somewhere. From there you will able to access to this SQL server. That is a secured way that will show you. And then diagnose and solve problems. If there is any issue in the SQL server side, that will identify from here, and it will show you the remediations as well. And then coming to the settings part, here the first one is Entra ID. Which Microsoft Entra ID? I kept it as an admin. And regarding the Microsoft Entra ID, if you want you can add few more admins, or if you want you can remove the particular admin which you selected. So at the moment my ID is this one, I selected as an admin. If you want you can add few more, or if you want you can remove them, it's up to you. And if you want you can set only Microsoft Entra authentication, then you can put it here, so that it will allow only Microsoft Entra ID authentication, it won't allow SQL authentication. But this is not the recommended option, so leave it. Next one is SQL databases. At the moment I don't have any SQL databases here. Okay, you can see it, I have only plain SQL server, and I don't have any SQL databases here. If you want to create a database, where you need to do, you need to go to the overview. Here if you want you can create a new database. If you click on create a database, it will create a new database. Or else you can connect to SQL Server Management Studio, and from there also you can create one more SQL database for this SQL server. For now I'll show you how you can create a database by using the portal itself. So come to your SQL server and create one database from here itself. Or else, so if you want you can create from database here itself, or else you can simply go for SQL databases. This is also a separate entity. So if you click on SQL databases, it will show you what are the databases you have, and then you can create an SQL database from here itself. In both ways it will load you to the same place. It will ask you under which SQL server you want me to create SQL database. So if you come to here, you need to select the subscription and the resource group, and here you can specify the database name, whatever database name you want to give, you can give the database name. Here it will show you the SQL server, under which SQL server you want me to create a database. For example, if you see here, at the moment I have only one database, one SQL server under this particular resource group. That is what it is showing. Under this SQL server, I'll create a new database. So this database name is not a unique one. Database server name is unique, but database name is not unique. Okay, you can give it any name. And then want to use SQL Elastic Pool. So Elastic Pool, I already told you, it's a combination of multiple things. If you want to create a pool, inside the pool, if you want to add multiple databases, in that scenario you can use this one. Then it will ask you which pool I want to add it. Okay, so at the moment I don't have any pools, so I'm creating the direct database inside the SQL Server, so I will select as no. Okay, and then so workload environment, whether it is a production environment, whether it is a development environment, you need to select in your real time. For lower environments like dev environment, test environment, staging environment, or some kind of POC environments, or bug fix environment, or sandbox environments, for all this stuff you want, you can select development. For production environment, you can select production, or else it's up to you, you can select any environment, but the recommended approach is, if you have a production workload, better to select production one. If you select production one, here it will show you the respective configuration. Okay, so for compute and storage, it is asking standard series Gen 5 2 virtual cores and 32 GB memory. It is one, but I don't want to go for this approach. I want to go for DTU based approach. Yes, that also you can select it by using configure database. Here it will show you that option. You want to go for general purpose mode, or you want to go for DTU based mode. So two options it will show you. If you want, you can go for general purpose mode, where you can see the virtual CPUs and memory. Where if you go for DTU based model, so if it won't ask you like that, it would simply ask you, okay, how many DTUs you want to keep. If it is by default 5, you can keep it as 5. For it's basic. For production, it will ask you, it will allow you to increase DTUs. How many DTUs you want, that many DTUs you can increase it. Okay, based on the DTUs you increase, the data size it will try to increase. The maximum data size it will set to 250. Okay, so for the standard one, in your real-time environment, if it is production one, they will go for premium one. Okay, they are also getting the same option. There you can see how many DTUs you want, you can increase them, and how much database, how much size we require, that you can increase it accordingly. So if you want to go for a DTU model, you can go for it, or if you want to go for general purpose mode, that you can go. It's up to you. It will allow you to calculate also. If you see in the right side, it will show you the calculation of the pricing, how much price it will take. So estimated cost is 1346 rupees per month. Okay, based on the DTU selected. If you increase the DTUs count, the cost also will increase. So this way you can go for DTU based model, or you can go for general purpose model. And then how you want to store, or how you want to keep redundancy of your SQL server or a database. For example, if you see LRS, locally redundant storage, that means it will keep your database in a single data center. Whereas zone redundant means it will keep your data in multiple data centers across a region. Or if you want to go for geo redundant, it will keep your databases in multiple regions. Okay, geo zone is nothing but zone plus geo combination is nothing but geo zone, means it will keep your database in multiple regions, and at the same time in each region it will try to maintain multiple copies in different data centers. So that is about storage redundancy. For normal like test environment, dev environment, and lower environments, you can use LRS. For production environments, you can go for geo redundance or geo zone redundant. For test environment and lower environments, you can go for LRS or ZRS. For production environments, recommended is go for GRS as well as GZRS. Again, it is based on your organization policy. They will tell you where they want to keep your SQL database, like what kind of mode or redundancy they want to keep. They will tell you accordingly. You need to set it. And then go for networking part. So this is main important. If you see the SQL server, the networking, it won't allow you to set the private endpoints, or it won't allow you to choose the respective networks, because that's a plain SQL server. The main intention is the SQL database is very important. So because this is a place where you used to put your data, so here it is allowing, if you want to create a private endpoint, you can create it, or if you want to access publicly, you can access it. So all these options it will show you. Okay, if you allow the firewall rules, if you want to set the current IP address, so that it will allow the current IP address to access this SQL server. Okay, later also you can modify it, and if you want, you can create a private endpoints also. So this connection policy, you can put it as default, you don't need to worry about it. And the TLS version is also 1.2 at the moment, you can keep it as default. Okay, and then go for security. So again, Microsoft Defender for SQL, if you want to enable, you can enable it. If you want to disable it, you can disable it. And then there is some ledger for SQL. If you want, you can configure a ledger. This is not a big deal. It's only one-time activity, so that whenever you create any SQL databases that comes under this ledger. So it will maintain actually. So the ledger simply, for example, you have one SQL server and you created one SQL database. So it will try to maintain the data. Ledger is nothing but to maintain the data. So that data it will maintain from the ledger policy itself. So if you create the ledger one time, it will try to utilize that ledger later also for all the databases whatever you have. And next, database level key. If you want, you can again set up a key that you can set up from here itself. Database level and customer managed key, or server level customer managed key, or platform managed key, whatever you want to set up, you can set up here itself. So you can set up a user as and managed identity also for this database, so that you can only provide access to the database instead of provide access to the entire SQL server. So that is also you can choose it. As you can see, customer managed key, then it will ask you what is the key you have. If you have a key, you can give that key, or else if you can create a new key from the key vault itself. Just go to the key vault and generate a key and add it to the here. That's it. So that the key will be added. This key will be utilized for the backend communications. It don't have, or it doesn't have any relation with whatever the way you are accessing. It is out and out only for the backend communication of the SQL server to the database. That's it. If you want, you can use server level encryption key. That's it. If you don't want to specify exclusive keys, that's it. So if you want to enable encryption, you can enable encryption. For that, you have an encryption policy. By default, it has certain encryption policies available. It will try to utilize it. Okay, all the thing is, if you select additional features from that, it will cost you more accordingly to that. And next one is additional settings. So use existing data. If your database, whatever you are creating, if it is a fresh one, yes, you can select as use existing data as none. Or I have already one existing database, and on top of that I am creating a new database, then you can select backup, so that it will ask you where your backup is kept, and it will ask you to select that backup. So once you select that backup, based on that backup, it will create a new SQL database. Or if you want to test it, you can test it by using sample also, but I don't recommend to go for sample. Either you create a fresh one, click on none, or if you are creating based on the backup, you can select backup. And next is database collation. Collation means, again, it is a policy. By default, it will create one policy. You don't need to worry about it. This will basically use to compare the data whenever you are doing the referential backup or full backup or something. During that time, it will allow this particular policy, this collation policy, to make things clear. Okay, so you don't need to worry about it. By default, it has one collation policy. You can select that one also. And then maintenance window. When your SQL database want to maintain means it's go for restart, it go for update, so it will try to fix some hot fixes or patches, that you are telling to the Azure that okay, during this particular time it's okay to maintain, it's okay to update the databases. That time you are telling it as 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. If you want a customized one, and if you want to select one, then for customized solutions, not for all, they will give you some more options to select respective time, or else you can keep the default one itself. It won't reboot it, but it will try to update something during that time. That's it. It will take care everything. It will don't go for a down, or it will be up and running, but it will try to do some fixes and updates and everything in that particular time only. And then tags, you can specify whatever you require. So you can specify the tags whatever you require, and click on review, and it will tell you how much cost it requires, and click on create. That's it. So the SQL database is created. So if you go to the resource now, this is your SQL database. Okay, so again, here if you go to the overview, if you want to copy this database, you can click on copy, so that it will maintain a copy. So to where I need to create, so it will come as new underscore copy. It will create a new database with name underscore copy. So whatever the name you want, you can create it, you can give it a name. Okay, under the same SQL server if you want, or if you have an existing SQL server, one more server, you can select it in the drop down, so that the same copy of the database will be created under another SQL server with certain name. Okay, so that is to create a copy of the database. And restore, if you want to restore the database from backup, already taken backup, in that particular time, you can select restore. So if you see here, the source point in time restore. So wherever the latest backup available, it will show you the latest backup. You can select that latest backup, then you can restore it. So once you restore it, whatever the backup it was taken, the same backup will be restored. Only that much data will be available. Or if you want to export it to somewhere, in that scenario you can use export. Okay, export. So the file name, it will come as DACPAC file or backpack file, it will come like that. So it will, you need to give your file name, under which subscription you want to export, and it will allow you to choose which storage account I want to export. Okay, this export you can do to the storage account only, so that this particular database will be stored in under the storage account. The backup will be stored under the storage account, that you can configure it. How you are going to authenticate that, you can provide your authentication details. That's it. That's way you can export your database to a particular storage account. And yeah, I'll go to the SQL database again. Okay, that is about overview. And if you want, you can connect this database by using, how you are going to connect. So it is options you are giving. Connect using, by default, by using Azure Data Studio or by using Visual Studio. But in real-time environment, we will not use these two. Instead, we will use SQL Server Management Studio. So this is the tool which we can use to connect Azure SQL databases. To download it, just go for it, select for SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so select the respective version. So come to the official Microsoft version, download SQL Server Management Studio, and then download SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. Just click on it. So this is the options we have at the moment. If you want, you can select this one. 20.2 version will be downloaded. That's it. You don't need to do anything. Once it is downloaded, then go for the downloaded file. Okay, click on next, 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 and installed one. Okay, so let me try, I have it or not. Windows. I don't think I have. Okay, let me download it then. It will be helpful to you. Click on that. Then it will get downloads. Okay, it will take a bit, and it will download. Okay, my download is completed. Now I'll try to open this SQL Server Management Studio setup. Okay, so it will ask you the location where you want to install your Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and same options, if you remember. If you want to create an SQL server inside a virtual machine also, you need to create Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. Here itself you can create an SQL server. So you can select your respective location, click on install, so that on that particular location it will try to install the SQL server. Okay, same scenario when you are using a Azure virtual machine also, in that scenario also you have to maintain the same. Okay, it gets installed now. Click on close, and now if you go for your search and search for SQL Server, so you'll get SQL Server Management Studio installed. Click on that. So this where you need to perform, this you have to perform on your virtual machine where you have access to the SQL Server. So you need to go to your SQL database. There you need to configure the private endpoints to connect with. Go to the settings, go to the networking part. Okay, we'll go for SQL Server, then SQL Server. Okay, okay, here I have networking. So here I can allow, if you want you can disable public access, only allow access from private endpoints. You need to create your private endpoint for your subnet, and whatever the resources you have inside the subnet, from that resources only you can connect to that SQL Server. And I will select selected networks. So if you have existing virtual networks, you can add it them. I'm adding my private IP, my public IP at the moment to access it. So I'm adding my private IP address, that is IPv4 address. Go for what is my IP. search for my IP address. So here we have the IP address, my IP address, and then copy it, come here and add my IP address. If you want, you can define range also, but that's fine. So I try to provide access to the my IP address so that I can able to connect to this SQL database from my laptop. Okay, so now, okay, so it will show you like this. Here you need to provide your SQL server name. So I will give you my SQL server name. This is my SQL server name. I'm copying the SQL server name and I'm giving it. Okay, this is my SQL server name. And how you are going to authenticate. So at the moment, what we created during the SQL server creation, we have enabled both SQL server authentication as well as we enabled Entra authentication as well. Okay, if you enable SQL server, go for SQL server authentication. There you can specify your username and password. Okay, and that's it, nothing to specify more. If you are overall access to the SQL server, then you can provide only SQL server and your SQL server username and password, so that you can able to connect to that SQL server. Okay, I connected to my SQL server. If you have multiple databases and you have access to the specific database only, for example, if you come to your SQL server, if you expand it, you can see certain databases called new database. Okay, so actually SQL access provisioning will not happen on the portal side. The SQL access provisioning will happen from the database side, so that you can come to your SQL server. Here you have a security. Inside the security you have logins. Okay, if you want to create a new login, you can create a new login. Here you need to provide the respective username and the respective group you want to provide, whoever want to access, so that it will create a new name. Okay, so you can provide the SQL server name or login name and display name, and then just provide your password so that your username and password will be created. Okay, or else you can use the existing one itself. It's up to you. For example, I don't have access to the all databases, or I have access to the only one database. In that scenario, how you are going to access your SQL server? Same SQL server you need to select. Come to the connection property. Here you can select the respective database you want to connect. Okay, so that at the moment I have one database called new, so that it will directly connect me to that particular database. Okay, this is not provided, let it be. Will connect now again. So I have provided my SQL admin. I forgot to pass my password, admin at the 1 2 3 4 5 something, whatever the password you have specified, and then the database you just provide whatever you want to connect and click on connect. That's it. It will connect you to that particular database inside that SQL server. If you don't have access to the entire server, instead you have access to the only database. Okay, so if you want to provide access to the database specific, again that security will be there inside the database also. You can add that login here itself. Okay, so here also you can add the respective user, whoever want to add, you can add that user. So it's up to you. If you want to maintain your SQL on server level or access on server level, on database level, this way you can do it. Okay, now come to the main concept. So I am into the, at the moment I am into my SQL database, that is called a new database. As I told you, in your database the data will be stored in table format. That is what I told you. So you need to go to the tables. At the moment it has any table or not, just check it. So I have not created any tables. If the tables contains, those are the default tables called system tables. If I want to create a new table, how I can create it? So come to new and right click. Okay, so it will allow you an option to execute a query. Okay, new query. So I'm executing a new query. So there is a query language which you can use to interact with SQL server or SQL database. For example, I want to create a table. Okay, create table. So what is the table name I want to create? For example, test table I want to create, for example. So inside the table, what data you want to keep, for what column I want to keep. For example, I will show you the same in Excel format so that it will be easy to so my table name is, for example, SL. So So for example, I'll create the table name as SL number, and the data type what I'm going to create here is int integer. Okay, and then I want to create one more column like name, and this must be characteristics one. So how many characteristics you want, you can keep that characteristics, so that many lines or that many characteristics it will allow. And it will again I will create one more column called age, and again that is integer, and that's it. So this is what I'm going to create an SQL table. So my intention is there must be 3 columns in the table called test, that is SL number and the name and age. These are the columns I want to create inside that particular table. So okay, completed. So now if you refresh it, you'll see a table inside the tables. Okay, so you have to define what kind of table you want to create and what kind of data you want to put inside it, so that in the SL number column it will. So if you see here, there is a table called dbo.test. Okay, so it's a database object called test. This is the table I created. So if I right click on this particular one, and if you select the query, so select top 100 rows or something, or else I want to create fresh query. Yes, how I can query on the table? Select. Okay, what you are going to select on the DBO test. So I know what columns I have inside this DBO test. If you want to see what all this stuff it has, select a star from DBO dot test. This is the column, this is the table, right? So with this it will try to give whatever you have. At what I have SL number, I have name, I have age. These 3 I have. So if I want to select only SL number, instead of star, what you need to select? SL number, you will select it. Okay, select SL number from dbo.test table. So if you execute this query, it will give you only SL number. Okay, so similarly, whatever the column you want to select, you can select it from the respective table. Okay, where you can do certain operations like create, update, remove, alter, or you can add where conditions, and all this stuff will be done by the database administrators. That's entirely different topic. Okay, the only thing what you need to observe is what is the table, how you can create it, what is the database, how you can create it. So if you want to create a new database, how you can create it. Okay, if you want to take a backup, how you can take the backup. So if you come here, if you go to the task, here also you can get an option called export data tier application, extract, import, export. Okay, there are certain options. These are the basic operations you will perform in your day-to-day life on SQL site. Okay, that's it. So if you want, you can create a new database from here itself, or else you can create from the portal also, the way I showed you to create the SQL database. In both ways you can connect, or you can create your SQL database. So this is about creating an SQL database and connecting an SQL database and executing queries over there. And if you come to the in-depth explanation of the database, then again activity log, it will show you what are the actions you performed on this database from the portal side, and if you have any tags to specify that, you can specify it, and if there is any issues that you can show it, you can get it under this diagnose and solve problems. And it is by default giving an option to query the database from portal itself. So if you want to execute a query, you need to log into the virtual machine, and you need to open SQL Server Management Studio, and you need to connect to the database, and there you need to execute the query. Instead, it is allowing you to query from portal itself, but this is not the recommended way, because you are querying from the portal means you are querying from the internet, because portal.azure.com is coming from the internet, so it will not allow you to query from here. Okay, it will not allow you to query from here. But at the moment I have added my IP address, that is the reason it was allowing. But in your real-time environment, better you could not add your public IP addresses over there directly, and you cannot query them there directly. Okay, so but I'm showing you the options it is offering. You can see the DBO test table, whatever you created over there, it came here. Okay, the same if you want, you can execute here itself. Select, it could be, it's not a case sensitive, select star from dbo.test. Okay, click on run. It will show you whatever it has: SL number, name, and age. Okay, so this way you can add your stuff or you can get your stuff from the SQL. And then mirror database, this is not required at the moment, still it is in preview. And then compute and storage, so how much DTUs and how much RAM storage they provided, that all the details it will show here. So you got 10 DTUs and 250 GB of the memory. So how much you utilized and what is the cost you need to pay. Okay, and that redundancy, all this stuff, whatever you see while creating, right, here you can see it. If you want to modify it, you can modify it from here itself also. At the moment I created 10 and I want to increase it to 20, yes, you can increase it. I want to make it to 30, yes, you can do it. And if you want to downsize it, yes, you can downsize it based on the size you have selected. It will allow you to the option. This way you can resize your SQL database. You can increase it or you can decrease it from this, but don't change the redundancy, it will cause problem. It will allow you to change it, but don't change it. The only thing you can play with is increasing the DTU size or decreasing the DTU size, or increasing the RAM or decreasing the RAM. So that's it, you can try. And next one, connection string. If you want to connect SQL database from multiple codes, if you want to connect from the .NET, then you can use this option, or SQL authentication, you can use this option, or password authentication, you can use this option. And JDBC or ODBC or PHP, if you want to access your SQL server from PHP, you can use the predefined code. Or if you want to access that from the Go language, you can use predefined code. So these are the predefined codes they are offering, where you can use to connect your SQL database from the respective code bases. That is called connection string. Connection string will be used to connect to the database, where you can define your SQL server name, your database name, your username, your password, everything will be there inside it. That is the reason it is calling it as connection string. It contains all the details to connect to your SQL server or SQL database. And then properties, it will show you the basic properties, what size it is, how much GB it having, what is the collection policy you are using, server name, and all this stuff it will show you under the properties. If you want to implement logs for this particular resource, you can implement the log, or else you can inherit the logs from the resource group itself, so that nobody can delete this particular resource. And data management, again, this is very important concept. The replica, what is meant by replica? If you want to maintain same SQL database in some other region or some other server, in that particular scenario you need to configure replicas, so that the same data will be replicated to another database in another server, in another region if you want. So if you create the replica, so whatever the database, source database, it will ask you the source database is new and the location it is, and what is the destination you are going to put. If you have another SQL server, you need to give that SQL server name, so that it will try to replicate the same database in another region, so that whatever the changes you made to this database, the same changes will go and put it under another region also. Okay, or another database under another database also. Those both will be replicated. In case of disaster recovery, you can use this database or you can use that database, it's up to you. Next one is sync to other database. For example, I have one SQL server and I have one more SQL server and I have one more SQL server. I want to keep sync between these three databases. In that scenario, you will use sync to other database. You can create a sync group. The group name it will create. Okay, if you want, you can use existing database for the sync operations, or you can create a separate database for sync operation. So if you want, I can use the existing one. Next, automatic sync. If you want, you can enable automatic sync for how much time you want to sync it. For every 10 minutes, it will try to check what is the data it has, what is the data you need to sync it. Based on the sync frequency, it will try to sync the database from this to that one. In particular, conflict resolution. For example, there is two databases. I will show you that the sync very particularly. For example, I have this database and I have this database. So what I want to do, I want to implement a sync between these two. Okay, I want to implement sync between these two. So for example, this is database A and this is database B. Okay, if you want to add a sync between what in that scenario, for example, if there is any new data adding into the A, automatically that A must be that B must be updated with same data. Okay, in some scenarios where B has certain data and A has certain data, in that scenario, if you want to sync, there might be conflict. What is the conflict? Whatever the data I have in the B, this is not here, and whatever the data I have in A, and this is not here. Now it will ask you what I need to update. In that scenario, there is a concept of member or hub. So who needs to win? So which sync needs to be happen? So that is called conflict resolution. In particular scenario, hub win or member win, what you require. The source what you are configuring is called as hub. The destination what you configured as a member. If you keep it as hub win, so that whatever the changes from A, this is called hub, this will be success, this will be win, so that this will be deployed to the B. Okay, B changes won't deploy into the A in that sense. If you select a member win, then A changes will not be deployed, only B changes will be synced to A. That is called hub win and member win. Okay, so hub database username, hub database password, the source database passwords are already there, and destination database, destination passwords you need to specify. If you want to configure a private link between these two databases, that you can configure a private link between these two. So the private link will be created later, you need to approve that private link. That's nothing but a private endpoint established between these two databases for the sync. That is about sync. And if you want to integrate your database with Azure Synapse, you can integrate it, or Azure AI search. If you want to integrate, you can integrate with Azure artificial intelligence search as well. If you have multiple search services created under AI, that you can integrate it. And if you want to integrate with Power Platform like Power BI resources, Power Apps, Power Automate, that also you can integrate it. Okay, and again the auditing purpose, I have told you one policy, that policy by default it will consider, and the ledger by default we have one ledger, and the data discovery and classification, so that you can utilize it, but in your regular scenarios there is no need to use this discovery and classification. Unnecessary it will class unnecessary load in the SQL database, so don't use it. And then for dynamic data masking, these are all the default stuffs. If you want to utilize it, you can utilize it, or else it's up to you. And then defender for cloud, so if there is any vulnerability or if there is any wrong access provisioning you provided, so all this stuff will be defined, all this stuff will be identified, and it will show you as a vulnerable, and it will show you the fix as well in the Microsoft Defender for cloud. And again, identity, system assign identity or user assign identity, if you want to add for a SQL database, that you can add it. Okay, that's it. These are not required. This is all for performance analysis and all this stuff. And alerts, if you want to configure any alerts for this particular SQL database, that you can configure it. It will show you the metrics as well, like how much CPU it is consuming, how much memory it is consuming, what kind of request it is getting, how much time it is taking to execute the query. So all this stuff you can see it under metrics part. So those metrics, if you want to send it to the log analytic workspace or certain kind of AI or event hub or event grid, or in that scenario you can use diagnostic settings. So with this diagnostic setting, you can able to send this particular logs and all this stuff to the respective place wherever you want to send it. And then logs, it by defaultly mapped with a log analytic workspace, so that if you can query that logs under this log analytic workspace. So what are the logs you are getting and what are the data you are getting, so all these things you can execute under this log analytic workspace section of the logs. Here you need to write a KQL query to query your logs. That's it. That's about SQL database. And I already showed you how we can create an SQL server and how we can create an SQL database inside the SQL server and all this stuff. You can see now the database is came into the picture. Okay, if you want to make the database online or offline, it's up to you. If you go to the databases again, and if you want to make them pause, or if you want to do that also you can do that, but that is not the recommended approach. Basically, if something is happen, automatically the status will change. Automatically the status will be change. Yeah, that's it from SQL side. I think I covered pretty much. And if you take any backups, that backups will get it under this backups option. So I have one SQL database at the moment. If you see this database, and this is the backup available. If you want, I can restore this backup. So that backups you can configure from here. So how many days you want to keep that backups and all this stuff, you can configure under the retention policy. So based on that, based on the retention policy, it will try to maintain that many days, and then it will delete. Okay, and it will show you the deleted databases. What are the databases you deleted, that will come here. And if you have any failovers configured, like you have another SQL server created and all this stuff, that failovers you can get it under failover groups part. And if you want to see how many databases are imported, how many databases are exported, that history you can show it under import and export history part. That's it. And if you want to add any private endpoints or enable disable public access, or you want to add any public IP, that you can do it under networking part. Again, defender for cloud, the same. If there is any vulnerabilities, it will show you. This is for encryption part, and this is the identity. If you want to enable system assigned identity or user assigned identity, that you can assign it under this identity part for this SQL server. And auditing, it will audit all this stuff what is happening to the SQL server. If you want, you can enable it, or if you want, you can disable it. And this is for performance tuning, and this is for monitoring part. So it will take that logs, how it is executing, what queries you are doing, and how the database are performing. All these things you can query using Query language query, KQL query. Yeah, that's it about SQL.